This story was narrated by Vid Crew Media. Please show your support by like and subscribe. Thank you. As a deafening silence descended upon the office, Jenny and Baldy stared at the calm Jared. Slowly, a sense of dread began to creep into them. "Sir, do you think he was speaking to Mr. Lewis over the phone just now?" Jenny asked softly. Baldy didn't answer because he didn't know what to say. The voice over the phone did sound like Tommy, but this kid looks so young and doesn't dress like someone rich at all. So, how is it possible for him to know Tommy and even speak to Tommy in such a condescending tone? In response to Baldy's silence, Jenny had no choice but to console herself. There's no way Mr. Lewis knows someone like that. Hence, he must be putting up an act. Besides, the person on the other end of the line can't be Mr. Lewis, as no one in Horrington would dare to speak to him in such a tone. Agreeing with Jenny's assumption, Baldy nodded in response. "Kid, stop pretending in front of us. Given how pathetic you look, there's no way Mr. Lewis knows you. How dare you use his name to fool us? You will pay for it with your life," Baldy roared. After giving Baldy side-eye, Jared ignored him with a smirk. "Sir, you should give Mr. Lewis a call and tell him to take care of this troublemaker. Also, you can find out if he was really speaking to Mr. Lewis just now," Jenny suggested. Nodding in agreement, Baldy took out his phone and was about to give Tommy a call when it suddenly rang. Coincidentally, Tommy had called first. Baldy answered the call at once. "Mr. Lewis." "Baldy, what did you do to offend Mr. Chance?" "Just you wait. I'm coming over right now. You can forget about running Moonlight Bar forever. If you have the guts to flee, you can go ahead and try. We'll see if I'm able to track you down." The moment he answered the call, Baldy was stupefied when Tommy's thundering voice echoed through the phone. The truth was now obvious regardless of how much he refused to believe it. Not only had Tommy spoken to Jared earlier, but he was also addressing him respectfully as Mr. Chance. Crash! Baldy dropped his phone onto the floor, smashing it into pieces. Gawking at Jared, he dropped to his knees with a thud. Equally shocked, Jenny quickly followed suit. "Mr. Chance, I'm sorry, please forgive me." Baldy groveled at Jared's feet. However, Jared couldn't be bothered. Instead, he was transferring his spiritual energy to Hilda so that she could regain consciousness. The drug Baldy had used on Hilda was so strong that Jared had to expend a significant amount of his energy before she could gradually open her eyes. Hilda called out in remorse the moment she saw Jared. After all, working as a hostess at a bar wasn't something to be proud of. "Hilda, are you feeling better? Let's leave this place," Jared suggested softly as he helped Hilda up from the couch. Hilda nodded. Suddenly, when she noticed Baldy and Jenny kneeling on the ground, she was shocked. She didn't understand why they were doing so and wondered if it was because of Jared. She gave him a puzzled look. To her, he was only an ordinary person, an ex-convict, and nothing more. "Let's go." Nonetheless, Jared didn't explain as he led Hilda out. Back in the bar, Tommy had arrived with his men and chased out all its patrons. As for the staff, all of them were huddling in a corner and squatting on the ground. When Hilda saw the large group of armed men, her face turned pale in fright. Tightening her grip on Jared's arm, she began to shiver slightly. "Don't be afraid," Jared reassured her. When Tommy saw Jared, he wanted to approach him to talk. However, Jared quickly stopped him by giving him a look. He didn't want Hilda to know that he knew Tommy. After all, Tommy didn't have a good reputation in the eyes of the masses. If his parents found out that he was hanging out with Tommy, they would definitely be outraged. Grasping what Jared meant, Tommy waved his hand for his men to open up a path. Just like that, Jared left with Hilda in tow under the watchful gazes of tens of men. The moment they reached the bar's entrance, an agonizing cry rang out from inside the bar. Moreover, they also heard sounds of the place being thrashed. After hailing a taxi, Jared went home together with Hilda. On the way back, Hilda glanced at Jared and wanted to explain herself. Somehow, the words just wouldn't come out. In the end, Jared asked first, "Why are you working in such a place?" Keeping her head low, Hilda rubbed her palms while biting down on her lip. It took her a while before she answered, "Jared, can you keep it from my mom? She will be furious if she finds out about that." Jared nodded. After collecting herself, Hilda continued, "Currently, I owe a debt of $1 million and a high-interest loan. If I don't work in a place like this, there's no way I can repay it. When that happens, they will demand it from my mom." Just as Hilda explained herself, tears began to stream down her face. "How did you end up deep in debt?" Jared furrowed his brows as he asked. Due to her poor family background, She has always been thrifty since she was young. So, how did she end up owing so much money? Hilda's sobs intensified at Jared's question. Teary-eyed, she explained, when I was in university, I had a boyfriend who was 2 years older than me. He was my senior. After graduation, he used my name to take the loan so that he could start a business. But after he got the money, I wasn't able to contact him anymore. When Hilda finished, Jared quickly realized that she had been scammed. At that moment, the taxi driver couldn't help but sigh. Girls nowadays are just too naive and trusting of others. $1 million is a lot of money. Just 2 days ago, I heard that a girl had taken her own life because of her high-interest loan. Hilda, don't cry. I'll help you think of a solution to repay the debt. Jared patted her on her shoulder, lifting her gaze. Hilda looked at him gratefully. Jared, I'm aware that you have just been released from prison and don't even have a job. In this case, how are you going to help me? Just don't tell my mom, and I'll figure it out myself. Don't worry, I won't do anything stupid. If anything happens to me, my mom will definitely not be able to live on. Smiling slightly, Jared didn't say anything further. Nevertheless, he resolved to help Hilda out with her high-interest loan. As of then, he still had the card William gave him, and it contained 10 million. Even if he needed more money, he could get it from Tommy. After all, the entire Templar regiment belonged to him. When they arrived home, the taxi driver refused to accept the fare. Instead, he smiled at Hilda. Miss, don't worry too much. Everything will be fine. With that, the taxi driver drove off. Watching the taxi leave, Jared was relieved to know that there were still kind-hearted folks in the world. When Jared brought Hilda home, he realized Chloe was still at his house chatting with his parents. Initially, he had planned to let Hilda regain her composure before sending her back, but now, they had been sighted. The moment they saw Jared and Hilda coming home together, Chloe and Gary were surprised. Only the blind Hannah was oblivious to what had just happened. She asked Jared, "Are you back? Why did you come home so late?" Gary quickly gave Hannah's hand a tug. Jared is with Hilda. They have returned together. Gary was all smiles when he spoke. After Hannah heard Gary's words, her face lit up in delight. Jared, you could have just told us that you were going to see Hilda. There's no need to be so secretive about it. Are you trying to give us a surprise? Just when Jared tried to explain, he realized he didn't even know where to begin. Only Chloe noticed that Hilda was looking out of sorts, as if she had just cried earlier. Knitting her brows, she asked Hilda, "Did you have to work late? Why did you cry? Moreover, you reek of alcohol." Bombarded by Chloe's questions, Hilda panicked and was lost for words. Mrs. Wallace, Hilda wasn't working overtime. She just went drinking with her colleagues. However, some of them were trying to get her drunk. Luckily, I happened to be there, so I brought her back instead. Jared quickly cooked up a story. The moment she heard it, Chloe got to her feet and checked Hilda's body. With a concerned look in her eyes, she complained, "What kind of colleagues are they? How could they make you drink when they knew you have low alcohol tolerance?" They went too far. When she saw how worried her mother was, Hilda couldn't contain her emotions any longer. Hugging Chloe, she burst into tears again. Chloe comforted, "Hilda, if you're unhappy at work, why don't you just quit? Especially since you have terrible colleagues." Chloe thought that her daughter was feeling indignant after being bullied by her colleagues. After all, Hilda had just started work recently and was considered new. It was common for newcomers to experience such treatment. "Hilda, stop crying. At most, you can just quit your job. Tomorrow, Gary is going to get a friend to help Jared find a job. Why don't we ask around for you too? Since you're a university graduate, it shouldn't be difficult to find a job," Hannah quickly reassured Hilda. Gary added, "I'll ask him about it tomorrow. It shouldn't be a problem because he's an old comrade of mine." The more everyone consoled her, the harder Hilda cried. Unfortunately, only Jared knew the real reason why she was crying. Powerless to do anything, Chloe had no choice but to take Hilda home. "Jared, you should sleep early too. Tomorrow, we'll take you to Mr. Saunders' house and get him to find you a job. We'll also ask him if he could help Hilda land a job. She really has it tough." Hannah sighed before she continued, "You should treat her better instead of bullying her." The man Hannah spoke of was Franklin Saunders. He used to serve in the military together with Gary. Ever since they were discharged from the military, Gary went on to work as a civil servant, while Franklin used his pension to start a business. As of then, he had done well for himself and was living a good life. "Mom, enough. Go to sleep now." Not bothered about what Jared had to say, Hannah walked right off. Jared was in a dilemma. He had always treated Hilda as a sister and never had romantic feelings for her. But now, he had no idea how to break it to his parents. Shaking his head in resignation, Jared returned to his room. For the time being, he couldn't return to Dragon Bay because he didn't want to anger his parents. The next morning, Hannah yelled, "Jared, get up quickly and dress presentably for once, instead of looking sloppy. Mr. Saunders has taken a day off on purpose." "I know," Jared replied as he opened his eyes. After having a simple breakfast, the three of them left home hurriedly. They hailed a taxi and headed to Franklin's house together. Franklin lived in Phoenix Garden, which was a famous residential area in Horrington. As houses there cost at least $1 million or more, it was a place out of reach for ordinary folks. "Jared, when we arrive, remember to be nice and behave respectfully. After all, we are asking him for help. Considering your situation, it's not easy to get a job, as most companies are unwilling to hire ex-convicts. Hence, you have to be aware of." In the car, Hannah kept nagging Jared, worried that he would make a mistake. Turning around from the front passenger seat, Gary put a stop to it. "Enough. There's no need to keep harping on it. So what if he has gone to prison before? Does it mean that he is of questionable character? I have been friends with Franklin for a long time, so this isn't going to be an issue." He was concerned that Hannah's nagging would exasperate Jared, especially when it came to his time in prison. After all, it wasn't his fault that he ended up there. "Since both of you are so close, why didn't he come and see you over the last few years? It's not like you're unaware of how much we have suffered recently." Hannah was upset. When Jared was in prison, their livelihoods were severely affected. Even then, Franklin was nowhere to be seen. "Stop blaming him, as I have never told him about it, and neither does he know where we stay. Anyway, both of us have gone through a lot together. Back then, when there was a stray grenade during training, I dived and tackled him to the ground, or else he wouldn't even be alive today." Gary's pride mattered a lot to him, especially since he was a squad leader back then. Therefore, he was too embarrassed to reveal his situation to his former comrades. If it wasn't because Jared needed a job, he wouldn't even have sought Franklin's help. "Mom, you know what kind of person Dad is. Once we're there, I know what I should be mindful of. When I start making money from my job, our family's circumstances will definitely improve," Jared reassured Hannah. Even though Jared had $10 million in his pocket, he couldn't tell his parents about it, as there was no way he could explain it. Even if he had told them the truth, they wouldn't believe him since his experience in prison over the last 3 years was just too bizarre. Meanwhile, on the second floor of a mansion in Phoenix Garden, Franklin, who was in his 50s, put on an old military uniform and adjusted it in front of the mirror. On the couch was a girl in her 20s. She had pretty features and a slender body. Wearing pajamas with floral prints, she was playing with her phone while lying there. "Dad, have you gone mad? Why are you wearing your old uniform?" the girl remarked as she glanced at Franklin. She was his only daughter, Maria Saunders. "I'm going to meet an old comrade of mine from the army. That's why I've put it on. Unfortunately, my tummy is so big that it no longer fits." At that moment, a middle-aged woman entered from the kitchen with a plate of fruits. She was wearing a suit with a white shirt underneath. Combined with nude-colored stockings and high heels, she was obviously a white-collar worker. The light makeup she wore made her look younger than her age. She was Franklin's wife, Frieda Lansom. She was also the sales manager of the company they owned. "Franklin, who is this comrade of yours? I heard many of them had struck it rich. You should rekindle your relationships with them and get them to help us. With their assistance, we might be able to overcome this crisis of ours. Otherwise, we will go bankrupt at the rate things are going," Frieda said with a grim tone as she placed the fruits on the table. "Don't worry about that first. This time, it's my old squad leader that's visiting. I haven't seen him for a few years, so you'd better be nice," Franklin snapped at Frieda. "Squad leader? Who knows, he might already be rich. I remember you telling me before that he saved your life once. After he left the army, he joined the government," Frieda commented. "Yes, it's just that we have lost contact in recent years, and I don't know what happened to him." Franklin nodded. "Perhaps he is already a high-ranking civil servant. When he arrives, you two can spend some quality time and reminisce about the past." Filled with delight, Frieda turned to Maria. "Go and get yourself changed quickly. Our guests are arriving, so you should dress up. Furthermore, this squad leader of your dad's has a son. When they arrive together, you might come on, Mom, stop it. I have a boyfriend now, and you're aware of it, aren't you? You're being such a pain. Getting up from the couch, Maria headed to her bedroom with an exasperated expression. You silly girl, I'm doing this for your own good. Zane is nothing more than a sales manager. This guy is the son of a powerful official. Zane is no match for him. Frida kept nagging Maria. Ignoring her mother, Maria entered her bedroom and slammed the door shut. What a rebellious child, Frida mumbled before turning toward Franklin. Franklin, I'm going to prepare some refreshments. In the meantime, remember to make a lunch reservation at a hotel so that we can have a meal together. Sure, Franklin nodded. Soon, Jared and his family arrived. After they pressed the doorbell, Franklin opened the door quickly. The moment Gary and Franklin saw each other, they hesitated briefly before giving each other a tight hug. Squad leader, I've missed you so much. You have changed so much over the years. Even your hair is all turning gray. Franklin exclaimed with a smile. Haha, you have grown a pot belly too. I'm amazed that you dare to wear your uniform with that body of yours. Laughing heartily, Gary gave Franklin a punch. When Franklin shifted his attention to Hannah and Jared, he was stunned by Hannah's listless eyes. As if she couldn't see anything, even though her eyes were wide open. Noticing his surprise, Gary quickly introduced, this is my wife Hannah. She lost her sight due to an illness a few years ago. Franklin said at once, nice to meet you, Mrs. Chance. Please come in right away. Hannah nodded with a smile, thank you. I have heard a lot about you from Gary. If not for squad leader, I wouldn't even be standing here. Franklin helped Hannah in at once. Mr. Saunders, let me do it. Jared stepped forward and supported Hannah. This is my son, Jared, Gary remarked. After glancing at Jared, Franklin said with a smile, he looks like a capable young man, just like his dad back in the day. Hearing that, Jared cast a smile. He had a good impression of Franklin, as he felt that Franklin had a genuine smile and didn't put on any airs. Nonetheless, no one noticed the momentary change in Gary and Hannah's faces when Franklin uttered the comment. Franklin, is your former squad leader here? Frida hurried out of the kitchen to welcome them with a big plate of fruits. This is my wife, Frida. Franklin introduced his wife to Gary and his family. Nice to meet you. Gary smiled politely. At that moment, Frida was stunned by how ordinary Gary's outfit was and the amount of gray hair he had. He didn't exude the authority of a powerful government official at all. When she turned to Hannah and Jared, she realized they were dressed as shabbily as ordinary folks. Have government officials nowadays dispensed with the pomp? What are you spacing out for? He is talking to you. Franklin tugged at Frida's arm when he saw her gawking. Having regained her senses, Frida quickly welcomed her guests. Oh, it's a pleasure to meet you. Please have a seat. I have prepared some fruits for you. After Gary and his family were seated on the couch, Franklin served them coffee right away. He even shouted toward the bedroom, Maria, Mr. Chance is here. Come down quickly. Franklin, it's all right. I'm sorry to have interrupted you on such short notice. Gary was embarrassed when he saw how welcoming Franklin was. Don't be a stranger. After all, we haven't seen each other for many years. Therefore, just make yourself at home. I have also made lunch reservations at a hotel so that we can have a wonderful meal together, Franklin suggested as he poured some coffee for Gary. At that moment, Maria stepped into the living room. She was dressed in sports attire and had her hair tied in a ponytail, making her look youthful and vibrant. After sweeping her gaze around, she finally fixated her gaze on Jared. However, she noticed that he was dressed shabbily and looked like a country bumpkin instead of the son of a powerful government official. Maria, greet Mr. Chance, Franklin reminded her. Mr. Chance, nice to meet you. Maria called out insincerely. In fact, the contempt she had for them was written all over her face. Maria, how can you? When he noticed Maria's attitude, Franklin was about to lose his temper, but Gary stopped him. Hi Maria. After holding Franklin back, Gary nodded at her with a smile. When both families sat down and chat, it was obvious that Maria was feeling awkward. Mr. Chance, I heard Franklin mention that you joined the government service after leaving the army. Now that so many years have passed, I'm sure you have achieved a very high position. Am I right? Frida asked in a forthright manner. Her question had caused Gary to blush in embarrassment. He then replied awkwardly, no, I have left the service. Isn't that too early for retirement? Frida exclaimed in shock. Enough. Why do you have so many unnecessary questions? Are you conducting a background check? Franklin shot her a glare. In truth, Franklin had sensed that something was off the moment Gary and his family arrived. After running a company for such a long time, He had met many government officials before. However, he didn't feel any similar sort of aura from Gary. Nevertheless, he didn't reveal his doubts because he knew what kind of person his wife was. The moment she found out that Gary was just an ordinary person, she would turn on him on the spot. "I was just being curious. Why do you have to snap at me?" Frieda rolled her eyes at Franklin. After that, she continued, "Mr. Chance, what was your rank before you retired?" In the face of Frieda's questions, Gary knew that it was impossible to hide it from her. Besides, since they were there to seek Franklin's help, there was no need to do so either. Hence, he answered awkwardly, "I was sacked." At that moment, Gary came clean with Franklin. Given the circumstances, he no longer cared about whether he would be humiliated. To him, his ego was no longer worth anything. When Frieda heard what had happened, her smile disappeared right away. Instead, she rolled her eyes in response. On the other hand, Franklin was filled with shock. He then asked Gary, "Why didn't you tell me that you had fallen on hard times?" "That's in the past. Now that Jared is back, I'm wondering if you can help me secure a job for him." "It doesn't matter how tough the job is," Gary asked in a subservient tone. "No one dares to take in an ex-convict." Before Franklin could reply, Frieda preempted him. She was now behaving like an entirely different person. Franklin's expression became solemn after he heard Gary's request. Consequently, Gary added candidly, "It's fine if it's too much trouble. Worst comes to worst, I'll get him to work in construction. Squad leader, to be honest, my company is in trouble too. If I can't overcome this crisis, I'm afraid I will go bankrupt. Therefore, I would only be impeding his career by hiring him." Franklin confessed with a sigh. Feeling embarrassed, Gary said, "Franklin, I'm sorry to have made trouble for you. Anyway, don't worry about Jared. Instead, what problems are your company facing?" "Our problems? Can you solve them?" Frieda sneered. Gary blushed in humiliation. "Shut up." Franklin glared at Frieda before saying apologetically, "Squad leader, ignore her bitchiness. My company has dealings with Glamorous Designs. Unfortunately, they have stopped supplying goods to us, causing our cash flow to be stuck. Consequently, I don't know how long I can hold out for. As for finding Jared a job, I'll get Maria to check with her company, since it's a conglomerate and it provides good benefits. Jared can slowly work his way up from the bottom." Visibly upset by Franklin's words, Maria retorted, "Dad, I'm nothing but a salesperson. I don't have such authority at all. You'd better not cause me any trouble." "You might not be able to do so, but isn't Zane the sales manager? Can't he hire just one person?" Franklin demanded. Before Maria could finish, Franklin threatened, "Enough. This is how it's going to be. If Zane doesn't have the capability to do it, I will have to reconsider his compatibility with you." Maria fell silent in response. All she could do was pout in anger. "Franklin, it took a lot of effort for Maria to join that company. Aren't you just causing unnecessary trouble for her? Besides, does that company even accept ex-convicts in the first place?" Frieda remonstrated with Franklin after shooting Jared a glance. Despite feeling upset at being called an ex-convict, Jared kept his temper in check. After all, he felt that Franklin was a good man. "Dad, let me be frank here. I'll get him in the door, but whether or not he can pass the interview will be up to his own capabilities." Maria rolled her eyes before returning to her bedroom. "Squad leader, please don't mind her attitude. That girl has a really nasty attitude," Franklin explained to Gary awkwardly. Gary smiled wryly in response. Given the dire circumstances, he was in no position to be upset about her unfriendly attitude. "Franklin, I appreciate what you have done. Anyway, I have something on, and I'll have to take my leave." Gary was cognizant that there was no point in staying any longer. The last thing he wanted was to cause trouble for Franklin and his family. "Squad leader, why don't we have lunch first?" "As I have already made reservations," Franklin added quickly. "It's all right. Next time, perhaps." Gary waved his hand. At the same time, Jared helped Hannah up. Despite being aware of his wife and daughter's hostility to his guests, there was little Franklin could do about it, other than smile apologetically. "When the opportunity arises, the two of us should have a drink together." When Franklin escorted his guests out, Frieda sat on the sofa and couldn't be bothered. "Mr. Saunders, what's the name of the company that owed you money?" Jared asked the moment he walked out the door. "It's called Glamorous Designs. Do you know anyone there?" Franklin asked out of curiosity. Jared shook his head. "No, but I'll try and collect the money for you." "I appreciate the thought, but you'd better not do anything illegal after having just been released. Instead, just take good care of your parents. As for my problems, you don't have to worry about it. Thinking that Jared was probably a gangster, Franklin assumed that he was going to collect the debt by force. After all, Jared had just been released from prison. Jared replied with a smile, "Mr. Chance, don't worry. I won't do anything stupid." Chuckling, Franklin patted Jared on his shoulder. "I appreciate your willingness to help." After leaving Franklin's house, Gary let out a gentle sigh. "Jared, Mr. Saunders is a good man. If you manage to get a job tomorrow, you have to work hard so that others would not look down on you." Evidently, Gary was hurt by the treatment Franklin's wife and daughter gave him. Unfortunately, he had resigned himself to the fact that his incompetence had forced him to seek help from others. "I understand." Jared nodded, feeling disheartened. Hannah remarked, "What's going to happen to Hilda after what transpired today? We can't be asking for their help again." They had agreed to help Hilda find a job, but now they didn't even have the chance to bring it up. In response, Gary lowered his head and lit a cigarette in silence. Evidently, he didn't know how he was going to break the news to Chloe. "Mom, Dad, don't worry about it. I'll think of a way to help Hilda. If I can land a job in the company, I will help her secure a job there too," Jared reassured his parents. "I guess that's all we can do." Gary nodded. After hailing a taxi, they hurried back home. Inside the car, Jared sent a message to Tommy. He related Franklin's situation and instructed Tommy to get glamorous designs to pay up. After that, he kept his phone and closed his eyes to rest. Soon, they arrived at the entrance of their residential area, only to find Hilda pacing about anxiously. Curious, Jared asked, "Hilda, what are you doing here?" "Jared, when she was about to explain, she held her tongue when she saw Gary and Hannah alight from the taxi." At the sight of Hilda, Gary assumed that she was waiting to ask about the job. Blushing in embarrassment, he said, "Jared, you should go ahead and talk to Hilda. Meanwhile, I'll head home first with your mom." Gary couldn't bring himself to explain to her. After all, he was an elder and had failed to deliver what he had confidently promised the day before. After watching his parents leave, Jared inquired, "Hilda, did something happen?" Teary-eyed, Hilda explained, "Jared, I am scared. The debt collectors are after me. Hence, I'm worried that my mom will find out." "Calm down, Hilda. I'm right here. When they come, I'll deal with them for you," Jared comforted her. "Jared, please don't get into a fight. I don't want you to be locked up again because of me." Even though Jared was the only person Hilda could rely on, she didn't want history to repeat itself on her account. "Don't worry. There won't be any violence." Jared smiled slightly. While they were talking, an SUV suddenly screeched to a halt in front of them. From it, a group of 5 burly men alighted. One of them wore a big gold chain and sported a crew cut. The expression he carried was especially ferocious. The moment Hilda saw the men, she quickly hid behind Jared. Their leader, the one wearing the gold chain, asked, "Girl, have you prepared the money? If you don't pay up today, I'll confiscate everything you have at home." I don't have it. Can you give me a few more days?" Hilda answered meekly. "No, not a single day more. If you have nothing valuable at home, we will take you with us. You look decent, so I think you should be worth a pretty penny." The moment he finished speaking, the leader ignored Jared and tried to grab Hilda. However, the moment he reached out, Jared grabbed his hand. "I'll pay what she owes you, so keep your hands away from her," Jared warned him calmly. "You." The leader scrutinized Jared briefly. When he saw that Jared's outfit didn't cost more than $200, he sneered. "Do you know how much she owes us?" "1 million, Jared replied. "HMPH. More than that," the leader scoffed. "How can that be? Last week, you told me that I only needed to repay 1 million, Hilda questioned in shock. "That was last week. Have you forgotten about the interest? It's now 1,300,000. And not a penny less," the despicable man declared with a smirk. Hilda was stupefied that her debt had jumped by 300,000 in 1 week. Even if she was a money printing machine, she wouldn't be able to keep up with its pace. "Fine, I'll pay you 1,300,000, Jared remarked plainly. The leader was stunned at how readily Jared agreed to it. Hilda, too, couldn't believe her ears as she looked at Jared in disbelief. "Jared, where are you going to get the money?" Hilda knew that there was no way Jared would have so much money given that he had just been released from prison and didn't even have a job. When the leader heard Hilda's words, he glared at Jared. "Kid, are you sure you have the money? Do you know what the consequences are for messing with me?" Just as he spoke, the man unsheathed the dagger. At the sight of the dagger, Hilda paled, and she stayed close to Jared. "I will keep my word. All you have to do is to come with me to the bank where I'll withdraw the money." Unfazed by the threats, Jared was a sea of calm. When the man saw how compass Jared was, he couldn't help but admire his courage. "Fine, you've got guts, kid, so I'll believe you this once and go with you to the bank." The moment he finished speaking, he stepped aside to make way. After giving his men a look, one of them opened the car door. "Let's go. Get in." The leader gestured with his head. Turning around, Jared instructed softly, "Hilda, you should head home now. Don't tell your mom or my parents about this. I'll be back in a short while." Jared holding onto Jared's arm, Hilda gave him a concerned look. "Don't worry, I'll be fine." After smiling faintly at her, he turned and got into the car. Watching the car leave, Hilda could feel her tears running down her cheeks. She was worried sick about Jared after the men took him. Soon, the car arrived in front of a bank. "Remember, don't try anything funny. We'll be waiting outside for you," the leader warned. Disregarding his words, Jared walked right into the bank. Considering how crowded it was inside, Jared had no choice but to queue. "Sir, you can use the ATM to withdraw money. There's no need for you to queue," a bank staff told Jared politely. "I'm withdrawing a big sum which the ATM doesn't allow me to," Jared responded with a cordial smile. "Sir, may I know how much money you are intending to withdraw?" the staff asked. "More than $1 million." Just as he spoke, those people queuing up before him turned around. After all, $1 million was a massive sum indeed. Jared, at that moment, a fashionably dressed lady in heavy makeup called out to him from the queue. She was wearing a pair of sunglasses that was so big that it covered half her face. "And you are?" Jared furrowed his brows slightly as he scrutinized the lady. "It's me, Delilah Landry." The lady took off her sunglasses. Jared suddenly remembered. "Oh, it's you. I almost couldn't recognize you." Delilah was Jared's classmate from high school. In fact, both of them even shared a table. Back then, she had a terrible dress sense and was a far cry from how she looked now. After scanning Jared from head to toe, Delilah sneered. "I heard you went to jail. When did you get out?" Delilah had brought up his prison sentence on purpose. Obviously, she was looking to denigrate him in public. When both of them sat together in school, she had even written him a love letter. After all, Jared came from a decent background, as his father worked for the government. For the same reason, Jared was popular with the girls. Nonetheless, Jared had ignored her because she wasn't attractive at all back then. "It's been a couple of days since my release," Jared answered candidly. "You're withdrawing $1 million despite just coming out of prison. You must be rich," Delilah remarked with a snigger. Without elaborating, all Jared did was smile. Then he changed the topic and asked, "When did you come to Horrington? I heard that you dropped out after high school." "That's right, I did. However, I am now more successful than a university graduate like you." Just as she spoke, she pointed at a fat middle-aged man sitting on a chair and gloated, "That's my boyfriend. He owns a company and has tens of millions in assets. Today, he is getting a card for me, and I will be in charge of his money from now on." A smug expression was plastered on Delilah's face. Even though the middle-aged man looked older than her father, she didn't see anything wrong with it. All that mattered to her was that the man was rich. Glancing at the fat middle-aged man, Jared let out a faint smile. "In that case, congratulations on finding a rich boyfriend." Even though Jared was smiling innocuously, Delilah was struck by a sense of scorn. In fact, she felt as if Jared was mocking her. "Sir, if you want to withdraw more than $500,000, you have to make an appointment beforehand. Do you have one?" After learning that Jared was an ex-convict, the bank staff spoke in a harsh tone. "It's urgent, so I didn't make an appointment. Can you help me out this time?" Jared inquired. "Jared, why do you need $1 million so urgently? Judging by your looks, you don't seem to have that much money. Are you trying to make a fool of yourself here?" Delilah ridiculed Jared. Ignoring her, Jared took out his card and handed it over to the staff. "I have $10 million inside and just want to withdraw $1,300,000. Can you make an exception?" $10 million? Who are you kidding? You're nothing but an ex-convict. How is it possible for you to have so much money?" Delilah continued her mockery of Jared. At the same time, the bank staff began to grow impatient. "Even if you have $20 million, you will have to follow the bank's procedure. You can't." Before the staff finished her sentence, she caught a glimpse of Jared's card and widened her eyes in disbelief. The card was given to Jared by William, the richest man in Horrington. William's cards had a special mark printed on them. Therefore, the staff recognized it at once. Since Jared was holding a card belonging to the Sullivan family, the staff instantly knew that he was no ordinary person. "Please have a seat first, sir. I'll go and get the manager at once." The staff did a 180 in terms of his attitude toward Jared when he glimpsed the bank card in the man's hand. "Okay." Nodding, Jared took a seat at the side. while the staff hastily went to get the manager. Delilah was baffled at that turn of events, and she couldn't quite figure out why the bank staff became so courteous toward Jared out of the blue. "Do you really have 10 million, Jared?" she asked Jared skeptically after seeing the staff's sudden change in attitude. "What has that got to do with you?" Jared sneered. "Jared, let me tell you that forging a bank card is a crime. How could you possibly have 10 million when you're an ex-convict? Don't think I'm unaware that your family is still living in that old neighborhood, and your father is currently sweeping the streets. How could you have 10 million? Of course, Delilah didn't believe that he truly had 10 million. If he really has that much money, would he still be living in that crappy neighborhood? Besides, he had just gotten out of prison, so he can't possibly have made 10 million in a few days. He must be deliberately putting on a show in front of me, thus saying that to fool me." When the other customers in the bank heard her remark, they all cast curious glances at Jared. These days, all cash withdrawals are made via bank cards, and a simple check will tell whether there's money in the card. There can't be someone so foolish as to forge a bank card. No. Shortly after, the bank staff who had just left returned with a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man was wearing glasses and seemed to be in a hurry. "Hello, sir. I'm the bank manager. How may I help you?" the middle-aged man inquired politely after walking over to Jared. "I'd like to withdraw 1.3 million, but I don't have an appointment. Can I still make the withdrawal?" While speaking, Jared handed the bank card to the bank manager. The moment the bank manager saw the card, his expression changed slightly. "Sure, you don't need to make an appointment, sir. However, we presently don't have that much cash on hand. I'll have someone deliver some money over from other branches right away. Please adjourn to my office while you wait, sir." Jared nodded and got up to head to the man's office to wait. Seeing that, Delilah was entirely dumbfounded. She stepped forward and blocked the bank manager's path, screeching, "What's wrong with this bank? Why can he make a withdrawal when he doesn't have an appointment? He's merely an ex-convict. And you just agreed without even checking whether there's any money in his bank card. If that's the case, I also want to withdraw 1 million right now." After having bellowed at the man, she turned to her boyfriend and urged, "Let's also make a withdrawal of 1 million, darling." Braden strode over and swept his gaze over Jared. Then, he whipped out a bank card and handed it to the bank manager. "There's likewise 10 million in this card, and I also want to withdraw 1 million now." Alas, the bank manager didn't even spare it a glance, merely replying placidly, "I'm sorry, but that's not possible without an appointment." That answer had Delilah flipping her lid. Arg, he clearly has double standards. Jared can withdraw money without an appointment when he has 10 million in his bank card. Our bank card also has 10 million. Yet we need to make an appointment. What kind of crappy bank is this? I want to lodge a complaint. Why do we need an appointment when he doesn't need one? We also have 10 million in the bank card. Didn't you hear that? She roared at the bank manager. This gentleman is a supreme VIP client of this bank, so he doesn't need an appointment. You both, on the other hand, are merely ordinary clients. As such, there's no comparison, the bank manager explained indifferently. Upon hearing that, Delilah almost burst a blood vessel. She shot daggers at the man. He's a supreme VIP client. Are you making a mistake here? He's merely an ex-convict who had just been released from prison. This gentleman's bank card is a customized card issued to the Sullivan family. We only acknowledge the card and not the person. Do you think the two of you can compare with the Sullivan family? A glimmer of contempt flittered across the eyes of the bank manager. His words stunned Delilah for a moment while the people around them exclaimed in awe. After all, the Sullivan family was the wealthiest family in Horrington. As such, it was no wonder that the staff earlier changed his attitude instantly when he glimpsed the bank card in Jared's hand. When one had a bank card issued to the Sullivan family, the bank would even send someone to personally deliver the money with a single phone call, much less coming to the bank in person to make a withdrawal. All banks competed among themselves for such a client. The instant Braden heard that Jared was in possession of a customized bank card issued to the Sullivan family, he went as pale as a sheet. Crap, if he's really associated with the Sullivan family, my small company will go bankrupt with a single word from him. That's impossible. How could he have a customized card issued to the Sullivan family? He must have stolen it or picked it up somewhere. He can't possibly have anything to do with the Sullivan family. Still, Delilah didn't believe it. Jared is just an ordinary person, and he has just gotten out of prison. How could he be associated with the Sullivan family? When the bank manager saw that she was still making a scene, his expression went chilly. Security. Throw them out of here. In no time, 2 security guards marched over and kicked Delilah out. Even Braden was given the boot. What exactly is going on here? What does that former classmate of yours have to do with the Sullivan family? Braden questioned worriedly. I've never heard of him having anything to do with the Sullivan family. If he really had some kind of association with them, he wouldn't have gone to prison. How could he have hooked up with them in the mere few days he was released? If you ask me, I think he must have picked that bank card up somewhere. This bank manager is an utter idiot. Delilah snapped with fury written all over her face. All right, don't bother about that anymore. Let's go. Braden didn't want to get embroiled in the matter, since he would be up a creek without a paddle if Jared were really acquainted with the Sullivan family. Shortly after Delilah and her plump boyfriend exited the bank, the few people who had been waiting for Jared outside spotted them and rushed over. What a coincidence, Mr. Quigley. I didn't expect to meet you here. The man wearing a gold chain exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. Ah, it's you, Steele. Why are you guys here? Braden asked. Someone owes us money, so we're waiting for him to withdraw the money, Steele answered mildly. I see. Well, all the best. I've still got something to do, so let's have a drink sometime. After saying that, Braden made to leave while dragging Delilah along. The few men weren't the decent sort, so he didn't want to have too much interaction with them. Unexpectedly, Delilah refused to budge but queried in surprise. Is the person owing you money named Jared? Jared? Steele was startled for a while, but he promptly came around. Yeah, his name is Jared, if I'm not mistaken. He owes us $1.3 million. When Delilah heard that, she was thrilled to the point that she almost jumped for joy. I was just wondering why he insisted on withdrawing $1.3 million today. It turns out that he owes someone money and has to pay off his debt. Scoffing, she turned to Steele and inquired, how did he come to owe you money? This time, Steele didn't answer her, but glanced at Braden instead. Braden flashed him a smile. This is my girlfriend. Steele chuckled as soon as he heard that. Since you're Mr. Quigley's girlfriend, I'll be frank with you. It was a woman who took out a loan from us. He's helping her to pay it off, so it actually isn't his debt. Oh, I see. In that case, you can ask him for more in interest. He has $10 million in his bank card, Delilah whispered to him. $10 million? Steele was stupefied before a flash of glee showed on his face. Does he really have $10 million? He doesn't seem rich. At his dubiousness, Delilah hurriedly asserted, why would I lie to you? He said it himself in the bank earlier. If he really manages to withdraw $1.3 million later, it'll prove that there's indeed money in his bank card. That makes sense. Steele nodded in agreement. All right, that's enough. I've still got something to do, so let's go. Braden tugged at Delilah hard. What are you afraid of? Let's just wait here for a while and leave when Jared comes out later. I want to see whether he really has $10 million. Delilah shook him off hard. I'm not leaving. I still want to witness his humiliation later. Having no other choice, Braden could only stand there and wait. 10 minutes later, Jared walked out with a massive bag filled with cash. When Steele caught sight of him with the enormous bag in hand, he immediately stalked up to the man with the rest of the men. Seeing that, Delilah hurried over as well, eager to see whether Jared had withdrawn the money for real. Jared was a tad surprised that she hadn't left, but he didn't pay it much mind either. Where's the money, kid? Steele demanded. In response, Jared tossed the bag in his hand onto the ground, revealing the bills in there. The moment Steele's lackeys saw the stacks of bills, greed crept into their eyes. Delilah was also rather astonished. $1.3 million is all here. Not a single cent less, Jared replied evenly. Steele's lackey swiftly rushed forward to grab the money, but Steele stopped him. Kid, I'm afraid that $1.3 million isn't sufficient. While he too wanted to snatch the money, he wished to extort more out of Jared. After learning that he had $10 million. What do you mean? Jared frowned. Nothing much. I miscalculated the interest earlier. Now, the principal and interest total up to $2 million, Steele declared, the corners of his mouth turning up a fraction. At once, Jared's expression turned frosty, and murder blazed in his eyes. Don't you have $10 million, Jared? What's $2 million to you? Just go back in and withdraw the remainder. Delilah drawled as she eyed him gloatingly. Ignoring her altogether, Jared said to Steele, here's $1.3 million. If you don't want it, I'm going to redeposit it into the bank. Then, he bent down to retrieve the money to redeposit it into the bank. Kid, this money isn't yours anymore, so you can't touch it. Steele lifted his leg and stepped on the bag. Meanwhile, The two lackeys at the side quickly reached out and grabbed Jared's shoulder to restrain him, but to their surprise, they couldn't move him even an inch. No matter how much force they exerted, Jared's eyes glinted coldly, and he clutched their wrists. With a light squeeze, the sound of bones shattering split the air. In the blink of an eye, the two lackeys howled in agony. "How dare you make a move against my men? You must have a death wish." When Steele saw that, his expression darkened, and he shot his leg out at the man. "Kill him. Finish him off." Delilah cheered at the top of her lungs as elation suffused her upon seeing that. Pow! But just when Steele lifted his leg, Jared's leg shot out and landed on the man, sending him flying back. On the heels of that, Jared twisted his hands. The two lackeys' arms instantly snapped like a twig, and they let out a tormented wail. By then, only one lackey was left standing. When he saw that things were going downhill, he was so terrified that he turned tail. After all, there was no loyalty among ruffians. Jared slowly stalked toward Steele. Right then, the latter's face was drained of all color, and he felt as though someone was carving him up from within. When Steele saw Jared moving toward him, he struggled to get to his feet, but the pain was so excruciating that he couldn't do so. That kick from Jared was just too powerful. What are you trying to do? Let me tell you that I'm from the Crimson Dragon Gang, and our gang leader is none other than Stephen Fisher. The man's grim expression petrified him so greatly that he hastily mentioned the Crimson Dragon Gang. However, Jared sneered, "Stephen? Huh, if you hadn't said that you're from the Crimson Dragon Gang, I might have spared you. Alas, you don't have that opportunity anymore." Right after saying that, he stomped on Steele's legs and shattered them to the point that he could never walk again, no matter how skillful the doctor was. Sheer agony had Steele screaming at the top of his lungs even as he writhed on the ground. Terror struck Delilah when she saw Jared's ruthless methods and chilly expression. She trembled incessantly, her eyes brimming with horror. Likewise, Braden had also broken into a cold sweat, his knees knocking together. Picking up the money from the ground, Jared threw Delilah a glacial look. That mere glance scared her so much that she collapsed to the ground in fright. At the sight of her pathetic condition, Jared snorted and strode right into the bank to redeposit the money. When he arrived home, he saw that Hilda and Chloe were still there. As soon as Hilda spotted Jared, she frantically rushed over to him. She was on the verge of asking him how things went when she abruptly remembered that her mother was still there. Thus she said nothing. "Where did you go, Jared? Hilda has been waiting for you the entire day," Hannah chastised when she heard his return. "Go out for a walk with her and chat for a bit." "I had to handle something, Mom," Jared explained. "Mrs. Chance, I'll be going out for a walk with Jared then." Hilda strode out while dragging Jared along. At that second, she couldn't wait to know how he handled the matter. "Sure, go ahead, go and talk for a while, and we'll all have lunch here later." Hannah nodded happily. After Jared had left with Hilda, she remarked with a delighted expression, "Mrs. Wallace, I think they both seem to make a pretty good match." "I'm of the same opinion." Haha, Chloe laughed as well. "What did they do to you, Jared? Did they beat you up?" Hilda questioned urgently the instant they left the house. "Nope. Anyway, you don't have to worry about the loan anymore. It's settled now. In the future, find a decent job and work hard. I'm going for an interview tomorrow, and I'll recommend you there if the company is okay. Next time, you've got to be more discerning when getting yourself a boyfriend," Jared urged with a smile. Hilda nodded with adoration in her gaze as she stared at Jared, but he didn't look at her. He merely regarded her as a sister and had no romantic feelings for her, so he didn't want her to misunderstand. While they were strolling around the neighborhood, Jared's phone suddenly rang. It was a call from Josephine. "Where did you and your family go, Jared? Why aren't you all at Dragon Bay anymore? I asked the security, and he said that you moved out." Josephine went over to Dragon Bay in search of Jared, only to discover that he no longer lived there. "My parents weren't quite used to living there, so we moved back. Although the area is a bit old, they have more neighbors here who are all acquaintances." In truth, Jared lied because he had no idea why his parents wanted to leave Dragon Bay. "I see," Josephine murmured in acknowledgement, her disappointment clear as day. After chatting for a while longer, Jared hung up the phone. "Was that your girlfriend, Jared?" Hilda asked softly when the man had finished talking on the phone. Jared froze, not quite sure how he should answer that question. In all honesty, he himself didn't know whether Josephine was considered his girlfriend. when they had never confirmed their relationship officially. Noticing his hesitation, Hilda chuckled. "Never mind if you don't want to answer that. It's fine." Jared merely flashed her a smile without saying anything. When they had strolled around for some time, they both went back for lunch. Meanwhile, Leighton was lounging on the hospital bed in Horrington Hospital lazily. He wanted to go home instead of staying at the hospital, but his father disagreed and insisted that he recuperate at the hospital. After all, it wasn't a problem even if he were to stay at the hospital for a year, considering the Scott family's financial capability. While he was expiring in boredom, the hospital room door was pushed open and Sandy sashayed in with a lunchbox in hand. "I've got good news for you, Lee," Sandy crowed the second she stepped into the room. "What is it?" Leighton inquired. "Jared has been kicked out of Dragon Bay. Perhaps he had a falling out with Josephine," Sandy announced excitedly. "Why so?" Leighton was similarly ecstatic. "If he loses the protection of the Sullivan family, he'll be absolutely nothing. Then, I can crush him anytime. Why else could it be? I suppose Josephine has gotten sick of him. She must have been just toying with him. How could she have really fallen for him when they're not of equal standing at the end of the day?" Early this morning, the security at Dragon Bay said that his parents left with their luggage and returned to their old neighborhood, Sandy stated. Hearing that, Leighton guffawed. "Haha, that's great. I'm going to deal with him when I've recovered. I'll make his life a living hell." Early the following morning, Franklin called to inform that he had already instructed Maria to pick Jared up to go to the latter's office together. When Gary heard that, he quickly urged Jared to get out of bed. "You've got to make a good impression today, Jared. This is a huge company, so your future will be secure if you manage to get a job there and work your way up to be a department manager or the like," he reminded. "Got it, Dad?" Nodding, Jared snagged a shirt and slipped it on. However, Gary frowned. "How could you wear that when you're going for an interview? Wear a suit. And make it quick." "I don't have a suit, Dad." Jared wasn't in the habit of wearing suits, so he never bought any. At that precise moment, Hannah walked over and retorted, "Nonsense. Of course you do. Have you forgotten that you bought a suit 3 years ago for your wedding?" But in the end, speaking of that, she hastily zipped her mouth. Jared was going for an interview that day, so she didn't want to bring up the past. Soon, Jared put on the suit he bought 3 years ago. While it had been some years, it was still very new since he had never worn it. "My son sure is handsome in a suit. All the best." Gary patted Jared on the shoulder. "Jared, come over here and let me touch you." As Hannah couldn't see, she could only use her hands to sense Jared's appearance, as he wore a suit. Below their house right then, a red BMW was parked in front of the neighborhood. Standing before the front of the car, Maria eyed the dilapidated buildings in revulsion. "What kind of crappy place is this? It stinks to high heaven. Is this really fit for residence?" She frowned and pinched her nose, even as she continued grumbling. "I truly don't know what Dad was thinking when he asked me to come and pick him up," while muttering. She glanced at her watch every so often. Right then, she was dressed professionally with her long and creamy legs on display, snagging the attention of many. Nonetheless, she wore an expression of contempt and looked down on all who walked out of the neighborhood. After waiting for a while without any sign of Jared, she phoned Gary. Maria had previously asked Franklin for Gary's number. When the latter answered, she rudely snapped, "Do you know the time now? How much longer do you want me to wait? You don't even care about punctuality. Don't forget that it's your family begging me for a favor. Yet, you want me to wait." She hung up right after saying that without giving Gary any chance to respond. Meanwhile, Gary was stunned for a long while after the phone conversation ended. Embarrassment showed on his face, and he felt chagrined at having been lectured by the young Maria at his age. But recalling that Jared had to depend on her to recommend him a job, he endured the humiliation. "Who was that on the phone, Dad?" Jared queried. "It was Maria. She's already waiting downstairs, so hurry up and go down. Remember to speak nicely to her." Gary started urging him to go downstairs. After Jared went downstairs, he saw Maria waiting at the entrance. Hence, he went over to her and murmured apologetically, "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting." The moment Maria spotted him, she promptly barked with fury etched on her face. "If it weren't for my father's orders, I wouldn't have come to pick you up. Look at your dressing. What era is that suit from? How dated?" Jared's brows furrowed slightly, but he suppressed his anger and explained, "I bought it 3 years ago, but I've never worn it, so it's still new." knew my foot. No young man in this era would wear such an old-fashioned suit. Maria curled her lips derisively. Then, should I go back up and change? Jared questioned. Forget about it. There's no time for that when it's already late now. Hurry up and get into the car. Maria opened the car door with a frosty expression and climbed into the car unceremoniously. Jared wanted to sit in the passenger seat, but Maria snarled at him when he opened the car door. Sit in the back. Do you think you're worthy of sitting in the passenger seat? At that, Jared frowned again, though he did as ordered and slipped into the back seat. Without even waiting for him to settle, Maria floored the gas pedal. It was fortunate that he knew martial arts, or he would have slammed into the front seat. Remember that you can't mention anything about being acquainted with me when we arrive at the office. Also, I don't care whether you pass the interview. Don't expect me to help you either. It's already benevolent of me to recommend you for an interview. Maria rambled on and on during the drive, mainly forbidding him from saying that he knew her, because she was afraid that he would embarrass her. Okay. Jared merely gave her a placid one-worded reply. In no time, they arrived at Maria's company. It was a corporate group with more than a dozen floors in the entire building. Sentiment Chemical Limited. This company belongs to the Sullivan family. Jared stared at the gigantic signboard of the company with his head lifted, a frown marring his countenance. If my memory serves, Sentiment Chemical Limited belongs to the Sullivan family. I remember Josephine saying that William established it on her birthday as a birthday gift for her. Indeed, Josephine was the chairman and legal person of that company. However, she didn't participate in its management and rarely visited the office. Yes, this company belongs to the Sullivan family, the wealthiest family in Horrington. It's a great honor to be able to secure a job here. The pay and benefits are far better than other companies, Maria declared proudly. Jared merely smiled without commenting further. He then followed her into the building. As soon as they reached the entrance, they saw a tall and handsome young man in a suit standing by the door. That was none other than Maria's boyfriend, Zane Carlson. Why are you so late today, Maria? When Zane caught sight of Maria, he immediately went up to her with a bright smile. Ugh, did you have to remind me of that? My father asked me to pick up his comrade's son, so I'm running a bit behind. Maria pouted, making it clear that she wasn't in that great a mood.